let's read chapter 4 from the beginning again. Okay?
Yeah.
So faith is the power. Again, every chapter here is like a new meditation on what faith and confidence are. So in this chapter, he really gets into what we explained many times already, that the faith is a circle and confidence is the line, and that's the basic metaphor, geometric metaphor that Kabbalah uses to explain the creation of the world. And again, when we say creation, explain creation, we don't mean like in science. The science wants to know how something happened. What caused it to happen? What is the cause? But in Torah, the main concern is a description of what happened. Because when you have a description of something, then you can gain an understanding of it, meaning you can become similar to it. There's this concept of mimicking God. What does it mean to mimic God? That if I know how God acts, I don't know how he does it, but I know that he acts in a certain way. By knowing what he does, I'm able to become like that as well. The knowing is becoming. As opposed to causation is not a guarantee. If you know what the cause of something is, it's not a guarantee that you can do the same thing.
Is it like mitzvah shelo lishma ba lishma? Is that where that idea comes from? Like, just do it, and it will become you. Instead
If
of
you
trying
can
to,
just
like,
do it,
fix everything from the source.
fine. If you can just, even if you can go down to the level of action, that's also good.
Mm-hmm.
But it starts by knowing.
And
Okay, so I'll try to say it a different way. There's a statement that says, if I knew God, I would be God. Have you ever heard that before? Ilu yidati ve'itiv. If I knew him, I would be him. So,
he's unknowable. So
what?
it's unknowable.
Right,
So
but Hashem is unknowable, so it's basically it's a non-starter, because I can't know Hashem. When the Rebbe Rashab taught this, so he said, Ilu yidati ve'itiv benichuta. Benichuta means it's a statement. It's not trying to tell you something you can't do. It's trying to tell you how to do something. If you want to be similar to God, what do? You know him. You try to know him. Even if you can't, it doesn't matter that you can't. As much as you know, that affects you, because knowledge is you. So this is not knowledge like in the sense of memorizing historical facts. This is knowledge that's psychological knowledge, that describes what's going on inside you. By the way, that's one of the reasons why a lot of therapists, they start their connection with somebody by telling them, why don't you tell me about yourself? Why? What good is that? Because that causes empathy. When you know about somebody, you can empathize with them. You can become similar to them in a certain sense. You take on part of them. And one of the main things that we do in therapy is we do positive projection, right? Which is that we want the client to project himself onto us. Freud called that transference. That he takes what he is and he says, you're like that. Why is that positive? That can be positive. It can be positive because if I'm willing to really empathize with him, so I can take part of the burden. I can take part of it myself. That's a very big deal, to have somebody that you're talking to that empathizes with you enough that they're willing to share it with you, and they're willing to carry some of the weight. So that's the type of knowledge that we're talking about. This type of knowledge is also true about Hashem. That's why, even though the Gemara says, don't look above or below or before or after, when it comes to creation, don't ask how this came about. Don't ask where it's going. Don't ask all these, what will be after it all ends. All these things, don't ask them because they're not very conducive to anything. But the Arizal, he decided that he could go there. And he said, not only can I go there, I have to go there. Because now it's not about, we're not talking about causation, we're not talking about how this came about. We're talking about understanding Hashem well enough, understanding the process that occurred, that created the world. It's also the process that creates us all the time. It creates us anew at every moment. So knowing is becoming. When you know at the psychological level, you become what you know. So here, faith and confidence, they're described as, they're corresponded as the metaphor that the Kabbalah uses to explain the creation of the world. And again, explain here is to know how it was created, not what went into it. It's just what it looks like. It's a description of it. So the description, like we said many times, is that there's Hashem's infinite light, God's infinite revelation. He reveals himself infinitely. And then, in order to create the worlds, he has to contract and push away that infinite revelation that fills everything, and he creates an empty void. And into the empty void, he introduces a ray of the infinite light again. The same infinite light that he pushed aside, now he brings it back down in a ray. And every time that the ray advances, and we'll understand what that means today, so every time it pushes a little bit further into the void, it lets out another circle, a new circle. Okay? So hopefully this is all at least somewhat familiar. So faith is the power of God's very essence which enacted the initial contraction. Why? Because the initial contraction was to create a circular void in the middle of the infinite light. So since faith is likened to a circle, so faith is what gave the void its shape. And when we say that it's circular, we don't mean that it has to be circular like a sphere. And right away people think that maybe we're talking about physical space. It doesn't. It's not physical space. It's an image. It's a geometrical metaphor. We'll see why that's important, because we've talked many times about circumstances, right? And what do we say about circumstances? I like that word because it comes from to circle. It circles you. So the question is, how do you take your circumstances? Do you take them as arbitrary, as random, or do you take them as something you need to have faith in? And so anything that's surrounding, that's circular, is related to faith, meaning that its rectification is to treat it with faith. Ken?
I was asking this sort of technical thing. So, as for us, is that the Om and Kif of the Rajla, the Keter?
So you're like a Gilgul, it's that idea.
Say.
It's like Gilgul, Galgal, so it has that same idea of seeing everything as a
Wheel.
like it's all connected, interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like
And it's circular. It starts and ends.
Mhm.
Starts and ends.
Which is described this.
Circular means there's a boundary to it?
It's as if there's something bounding it. We'll see in a moment. The faith is actually a binding force. It limits in some way. It keeps things intact. It keeps things. It guards things. And what would be what's circular that guards something? What do we have that's circular that is like it's mamish like it really means that. It's a guard.
Ring.
What?
You know, the ring.
Something you throw into the water to save something.
The womb. The womb is the most is the strongest example that the feminine is circular. Because that's how you give life. You have to have a lot of faith in order for something to develop. So you have to have faith in the circumstances. So by women during pregnancy, there's a very strong feeling that I hate my circumstances. It's terrible. You have to have a lot of faith in it that something good is going to be created from it. The same thing with the void. At first you look at it, it's a void. You can't look inside. There's nothing to see there. Almost like today, doctors look inside the womb, as it were. They think they're looking inside. Who knows where they're looking? They don't know where they're looking. But because you can't see inside, you have to have faith that what's going on inside is really creative. It's really something positive. So pregnancy needs a lot of faith. It doesn't need trust. Trust is something else. Confidence is once the baby comes out. Then you have to start working. It's positive. But in faith, it's just to guard it. That I want to, even in Hebrew, I don't remember what they call it in English, but in Hebrew it's called Shmirat Harayon. Like when a woman has any kind of problems during the pregnancy, so the doctors send her to home to rest or whatever it's called, like high risk pregnancy or whatever. So in Hebrew it's called Shmirat. It's to guard the pregnancy. So you guard it with a lot of faith. And even though it's very, very difficult to hold on to it, it's very okay. So faith is the power of God's very essence, which enacted the initial contraction. We've talked a lot about that, which is described as the removal, siluk, of the light, the revelation of God's essence to the sides, as it were. And it is the secret, as we talked last time in length, of the source enters the space of the light, as explained in Hasidic teachings. So where in Kabbalah it sounds like the space that's left is empty. So Hasidus explains that it's much more complex than that. That really, it's like if you had a candle and the sun would come out suddenly. You can't see the candle anymore. So it seems to you like the candle went out. There's nothing here anymore. But really, the candle is still there, the flame is still there. We've all seen this. You try to hold the candle up in midday, and you can see that there's a flame, but there's no light coming up. The light's still there. So why did that happen? Because the source appeared. The source of light appeared. The sun came out. So when the source comes in place of the light, of the illumination that it was illuminating, like the candle here, so suddenly the illumination seems to be gone. It seems like it's not here. So it looks like a void, but really it's just that the source came in its place. That's called knisat ama'or bimkom ha'or. Okay, we had this whole note down here that we tried to explain last time. So the source enters the space of light. Confidence is the secret of the ray and thread of infinite light, then drawn down into the void as the memale, as the filling light. And what's the difference between them? So we said the main difference between the circle and the line is that the circle represents limitlessness, there being no limits, because there's no up and down in a circle, so you can't measure up and down, and there's no end to a circle. You can't say where the beginning and where the end is. You can just keep revolving around it forever. You can't find the end. But the line represents limits, the power of the limit. So the line, there's a top and a bottom, and more importantly, it's gradated. It has, you know how far you've traveled because there's an end to it. So there are limits on it. So it's called the act of measurement. In the Zohar, many times the line is just called kav midah, the line of measurement. Right? Normally, when you meet somebody, before you meet them, so we talked a lot about that. You have to have faith in them. But once you know who they are, you begin to measure them. And so the measuring is already some kind of illumination, that I begin to see what's going on inside you. So it's making contact. Once I make contact, I begin to think about what am I seeing here? Does it measure up to what I thought? Is this a good person? Not such a good person? So on. You begin to measure. But you always have to have an element of faith when it comes to somebody else also. That as much as what I've measured might be true, but at the same time there's also here the infinity that's around this person. And so he could surprise me tomorrow. She could surprise me completely. It doesn't mean that what I've seen is all there is. So we talked a lot about why that faith also gives me faith in myself. Because we said that if I can have faith in Hashem, it's like having faith in another Jew, so I can have faith in myself also. That whatever I've been until now is just what's come down All I've seen is the limited part of who I am. But tomorrow, the unlimited can now bring out something new. The circle can bring down a new level of the ray. And that new level is completely different. It has talents that I've never seen before. So either everybody just remembers this, or it's not so interesting.
No, it's interesting.
Okay.
It's very interesting, and we remember it.
No, I don't.
Good. I was hoping that would be. So, confidence is the secret of the ray and thread of infinite light, and drawn down into the void as the Bamala, the light that fills all worlds. Which means that all of reality, beginning with primordial man, Adam Kadmon, who emits the lights of the ear, nose, mouth, these are all Kabbalistic concepts, are all measured and all enclosed and are inter-included in one another according to this line. So what is it doing? So this line, what it's doing is it's separating pieces. It's got everything in it, because it's the infinite light that was left on the outside of the circle, and it's coming now down, and it's, think of it like a straw that you're blowing into. And so everything that was on the outside is now coming in through this line. So everything, but because it measures things, it separates them also. It causes distinction. Whereas before there was no distinction between things. Everything was just, when the infinite light was there in that space, everything was just, as it were, mixed up. But now, because it's measuring, so it makes up and down, it creates a hierarchy. Right? The entire modern world now is postmodern. So the F word now is hierarchy. You know that, right? The most disgusting word in the world now is no longer, it starts with an F. It starts with an H. You heard this, right?
No.
It's the next letter. So instead of F, it's now H, right? It's the next letter after F.
No,
G is after F.
Yeah, because
I heard
G is
it's not.
God, so they can't. They have to skip. They have to skip. So they went to H.
Who's they?
Today?
The people who count, not you and me.
The sages?
No,
The masses.
the New York Times. No.
Well,
So the New York Times, the worst word in the world,
It's
hierarchy.
hierarchy is a bad word?
It's not just a bad word; it's the worst word in the world. What does hierarchy means? It's colonialism. It's white man's burden. It's
Division of
racist.
classes.
It's class struggle. It's all these things. Again, it's patriarchy. It's all the terrible things in the world. So you've got these neoconservatives, like Jordan Peterson, and he tries to make sense of it all and says, no, you need hierarchy. You can't live in the world without a hierarchy. It doesn't work. He's right, but that's not why we need hierarchy. But he's right. He's still right. There's other reasons why we need it. The hierarchy is given by the line. The world that was until 1950, until just after World War II, World War II basically shattered all the conventions that people had. It was such a trauma for mankind. We think we're the only ones that were traumatized.
Right.
The entire world was completely left begging for any kind of meaning, had no idea what to do. And the thing that strangely took over was Marxism. Everybody became a leftist. So at first in America there was a reaction to it called McCarthyism. So anybody who tried to show any signs of affiliation with the Communist Party, so they immediately witch hunted them and so on. But eventually the Marxists won. They didn't win through Marxism, they won through something called the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. A bunch of Jews, of course.
My sister.
What?
Erich Fromm was a famous one of them, Walter Benjamin, a whole series of these guys. And basically they were the most traumatized, obviously, because without question the Jews were the most traumatized from World War II. And one of the aspects in which we were traumatized was our connection with Hashem. Because until then, Hashem was viewed mostly as setting up hierarchy in the world. So in that sense, Hashem was like the line coming down, people associate Hashem only with the line, with the structure, with there being top and bottom. There's somebody on top, somebody on bottom. You're like a simple Jew. There's a Rav over there, and so on, and women and men, and all the different structures were this way. And they tore them all down, and basically they're still tearing them down. So you can't talk about hierarchy today. It's a word non grata. You can't say this word. It's mamish like, again, it's colonialism, patriarchism, all these things.
Can I just make the circle? I just got an image. I don't know if the outside of it, kind of all this all infinite went in a line with center,
Right.
and it just sort of, and that made obviously
Order.
order
Okay,
and individuality.
Right.
And, but it's all
No,
coming
not
from
in the
source. Oh,
individuality in a hierarchy.
right.
There was no real individuality.
Ah.
That's what they claim. That
They
you
claim-
weren't really free to be yourself because you had to fit into a certain social structure.
Oh.
So all this
That's what the
structuralism.
Kabbalah is saying, or that's what the
No, that's
what
how
you're
the
trying to
world was.
say?
I'm just explaining what it is in terms of the kind of, when the Arizal says this is how Hashem creates the world. He's not saying he created it once 5,779 years ago. It's how it is every moment.
Right.
So at every moment there's a hierarchy here. But now, because the hierarchy let everybody down, and they felt that it was bankrupt and there's no need for it anymore, and really we're better off in a world that has no borders, everything's free.
Imagine all the people.
Right? Imagine all the people. That's like the
That's John Lennon.
that's like
He's got another one.
the anthem, the political anthem of the anti-hierarchy anti-establishment. That's why you got in the 50s you got the beatniks, and then in the 60s you got the hippies, and in the 70s who knows what, druggies or whatever, and it just went and until now it's been 70 years of destroying hierarchy, and imagine that into the middle of this incredible movement, which again, Torah doesn't necessarily see as
Comes
negative.
Chabad.
Well, it's like Chabad Mela. Comes Israel, which is the most hierarchical, most colonial, most anything, exactly swimming against the current. You can't swim against the current. So it's a question about whether it can last or not. But the pressure is tremendous. That's why Israel is the symbol today. I mean, it's not that there aren't other symbols, like in Iran, they're also. But in Iran, they say they're not racist. That's just how they are. By Jews, because how can you be the type of Jew that lives in Eretz Yisrael and says that the land belongs to Jews when Walter Benjamin was also a Jew? That doesn't make any sense. What he doesn't. By the way, many of the people who even came to Eretz Yisrael were already of that. They were from the Frankfurt school, like Buber, was very connected to it. So it's been percolating here for a long, long time, and the world is really, to understand what's going on in Israel today, against Israel, and the world against Israel. You have to understand this whole breaking down of the line. The whole line is good. So pluralism is another word that comes into it and everything. There's like a question that was asked: how could it be that the Supreme Court? I have to say an introductory sentence. Law everywhere has become not about upholding society, but about protecting the individual. And that's what law is about today. And especially in Europe. It's the protection, the goal of the Supreme Court. In Israel, it's actually, that's how it's stated. The Supreme Court in Israel, what's called Bagatz, their official, what do you call it?
Platform.
Like,
Not
Platform.
their role, what they're supposed to do, what they were in law,
Right.
what they're supposed to do, is protect the individual against the unfair treatment from the government.
Wow.
That's what it's supposed to do. So now, how can you explain that 12, 13 years ago, suddenly the government decided to destroy 7,000 Jews' homes, and the Supreme Court said it's fine? What? How is that possible? How could they even twist their minds enough to say that? So it's very easy. Why? Because were these Jews who were living in In Tel Aviv? No. There were Jews who were living in colonial Gaza. They're the symbols of colonialism. Not only that, 95% of them had yarmulkes on their head. So they're the symbols of the enemy of the people, which is religion. So they don't deserve protection, even though as individuals they wanted to help them. So they made sure that as individuals they received proper compensation, let's say. But their rights to property, the rights to freedom, to free speech, all these things
So
were
happening
completely
in
trampled.
Russia.
That's exactly.
Why?
That's
Because
happening in Russia.
probably because even though they're individuals, they represent exactly the hierarchies that the Supreme Court is fighting against. So in the end, that trumped everything. That went against everything. The same thing is happening now with all these cases against the Haredis, that they you can't have separate seating at a concert. How can you say you're supposed to protect the rights of the individual? If there's a small group, the minority, if there's a small group that has its own practices, you're supposed to protect them. Why are you protecting them? No, because these guys, you don't understand. These guys with the hats, these women with the chevises, they're the symbol of the hierarchies we're trying to win against, we're trying to destroy. So we can't protect them, even though we'd like to. As people, they'd like to. But
So
they
who is the
sympathize.
state protecting?
But,
Besides the state.
so it'll protect Arabs, it'll protect Bedouin, protect everybody who's not a representative of the ruling hierarchy here. As if as if religion is the ruling hierarchy here, but at the core they're right, because the only reason we're in Eretz Yisrael is because the Torah told us to.
The Torah-
Otherwise we'd be in America, right? So, why would I be here? What are I losing? Yeah. So these are hierarchies. And this all comes from the line. And to uphold a hierarchy requires a lot of confidence. A tremendous amount of trust and confidence in your own abilities. That's what's called confidence. It's to believe that to trust that this builds reality. The line that comes in is what constructs reality.
So you have to keep re-questioning that kav and doing this process.
You have to
again
keep
and again?
extending it in.
No, but you know how, doesn't this process happen many, many times within a person?
Right,
Like he
right.
removes the light and lets a new kav come in.
Right.
So even when the kav is there, you have to kind of, how frequently do you have to question it? Like how accurate is this kav? How accurate is this direction I'm taking?
It's life.
So you keep
That's why
questioning.
it's the
It's
machine that
created
tells
every
you
second.
that shows you
So it's a constant re-question.
okay. Every moment.
Because you're saying you have to have total trust in it, but it's this paradox of having total trust in it and
So
re-questioning it.
let's take it to the psychological realm. In the psychological realm, it's the trust that the path I've been following, the line is like a path, that the path that I've been following is going to lead me to a good place. But to continue on the path, I need a lot of trust. I need a lot of confidence in myself, in Hashem, and other
Maybe
people.
I need to redraw down.
Maybe I need to bring something new down. We'll see in a moment what the new something is, but the thing that hinders us the most is we don't have enough confidence to take the next step. So where do we put the confidences? The passive and active. Where are they in the body? They're at the feet, at the left and right foot.
There you go.
It's the possibility.
I lost it first there and then. No,
It's
I
the
know.
possibility of taking another step.
Why would we have total confidence if people like Avraham and David could make grave errors in their kav? Like,
Cats can't walk.
so why shouldn't we fear that?
Fear.
Okay, so that's where the
But in
lack
order to
of
take the
perfect
next step-
trust comes from. I think.
You need to have
Yeah.
trust to take the next step.
Right. I guess what I'm asking is psychologically, what is that complete trust that I will draw this kav the direction I believe it's meant to go, even though I may totally be misinterpreting God. So it's okay. Misinterpret him.
That's what
You know what I'm saying?
about last week.
Right.
Talks to us,
So-
are we right or not?
Right.
Our interpretation.
Okay.
So that's why you take it back to somebody.
Even
who-
Moshe could misinterpret. So.
We said Moshe made mistakes.
Okay, so it's okay. You just keep Keep trusting and questioning at the
in
same
his
time.
confidence in himself, he made mistakes.
Mhm.
That's why he got angry. He became angry and he made 3 mistakes. So those mistakes, but there was another thing that looked like a mistake, but it wasn't a mistake, that he shattered the tablets. And Hashem said, no, that's exactly what I would have done. You hit what I, like,
Mhm.
okay? So that's the risk of life. It's always a risk. The next step is always a risk. You have to have a lot of trust in yourself and in Hashem. And again, the whole point here is that if you don't have faith first, the trust is only in yourself.
Mm.
That's the main thing. That if you have faith first, it's all Hashem, everything here is Hashem, and that's what we said, that's what it means to make an empty void. There's only Hashem here, it's all good. So then I'll have
Trust
faith,
that when the kav comes, it's
I'll
Hashem.
have trust to do the right thing, that that I'm doing the right thing, because it's coming from Hashem. It's actually a topic of a very important concept. That how do you know that somebody is healed? What's the sign that somebody is healed? The main sign is that they begin to do again. They begin to act. And a person who's mentally in a bad place, it's very hard for them to be productive. They're not productive at all usually. When you begin to produce again, that means that the midos inside, the confidence has been restored, and that you can take another step, that you can do something more. And again, that's the most important thing. But how do you get there? So this is something that whenever I have somebody who's a professional, like professional, what does professional mean? Professional means what was left over after there's no hierarchies. No, really. It's not maybe sound like a joke, but it's not a joke. It used to be that you were appointed to be what in England they call a barrister, and what in America they call a lawyer, which really means that you were appointed by the crown, and both sides were appointed by the crown. Then law was torn down a little bit, and then you got what do they call them? A solicitor. There's the barrister and the solicitor. And the solicitor, you solicit his help. So you have to pay him for it. He defends you. So he became a professional. Because now he's just offering you a service. He's not part of the hierarchy, he's just offering you a service. This exists everywhere now. There used to be, the king had the people who took care of the treasury. And slowly so at first it was like the Medicis or whoever it was, there were the king's people. They had to have, like in England you still see like on cereal boxes, by appointment to Her Majesty.
Right.
That like we're not professionals. We are by appointment we're part of the hierarchy. We're the official cereal makers for the queen. And that was everywhere in the world. The whole Western world was like that. Slowly began to tear down. The hierarchies began to tear down. It was already 300 years ago, 200 years ago. And then people became professionals. And when they're professionals, they give you a service or they give you a product, but they don't have an appointment to that. They basically decide to do it on their own. So professional is really what we call a freelancer, because he has his own lance. He's not fighting for the king anymore. He's got his own lance. He bought it in the store, and now he does his own fighting, and he fights for himself. Okay? So these professionals, what do you not have after a while? You don't have meaning, because when you were appointed, you were part of the hierarchy. Hierarchy gives you meaning. It gives you meaning because I'm part of the system. I'm part of something. I'm important. I see the king. That's what gives me my place in life. Structure. But meaning is like structure. The whole. If you ever study, this Asura was the first one in France, and then the whole continental movement of anti-structuralism, like to look for meaning outside of structure. Like how do you do that? Foucault, like you have to look for the history in between the lines, where there's no structure. That's where the history is really hiding, not in the place that the historians kept telling you, this happened, then happened, that happened. It's between the lines. Going off on a tangent. Keep that thought in mind a second. We'll come back to the freelancers and to the professionals. In Israel, they kept looking for what can anti-structuralism give us. They kept looking for it. So finally they got this half-intellectual officer in the army, was very, very leftist, and had studied anti-structuralism in university, especially in literature. And guess what? How he took anti-structuralism and he used it in the army. It's a terrible thing. Don't tell anybody. They try to hide it. But the leftists came up with this because you'll see in a moment that you have to think that what's going on is between the structures, not inside, not the way you're told. So he came up with the idea that when soldiers have to go from house to house, instead of going out of the door and then coming in the next door, and so that if there are terrorists and the other people who are armed and the other, so they know they're coming because they have to go out from the one, they're searching for something, right? So they go door to door. So they go out and they come in. That's structure. Why? Because the wall in between gives you structure. So what did he say? No, they're going to come with a ram. They're going to go through the wall. And it saved countless lives because they did that. And the leftists thought of that. Why? Because that's anti-structuralism. It's ingenious when you think about it.
Maybe that's the king breaking through the...
What do you
Yeah,
mean?
that's Melech Poretz Lo Derech.
They're breaking the wall down between two houses?
There's not real walls. They're like shanties.
Oh.
It's like almost like it's a partition.
Mm.
So you don't go out the door and come back in because they're waiting for you.
Mm-hmm.
So instead you come where they can't see you. They don't know where you're going to go, where exactly you're going to come in. So it changed the whole perspective. That's how anti-structuralism, the Sosura, it saves a lot of lives. So it's not all bad. It's not. But then of course he felt bad his whole life that he had taught the army how to say that. He did his mitzvah. So getting back to the professional. So what's the biggest problem with the professional? There's no meaning. If you're a lawyer, so sometimes you find meaning in the service that you're giving. But let's say you're a dentist. So you're right. I mean, when you help somebody and you alleviate the pain and you help them chew better, or whatever it is that you do as a dentist. So obviously there's some meaning in giving services. But in the end, it's every day for 40 years, day in, day out. All you're doing is drilling and drives you nuts.
This is a loss of purpose, is a disconnection in
Right.
structure, is a disconnection
Right, right,
in
right.
person's purpose.
Right.
It happens with musicians, all as well.
Everybody.
They're just,
Because you're giving a service,
right,
you're not creating anything anymore.
right.
Or, more importantly, you're not giving a service to somebody who counts. It's like you're giving a service from the bottom. So all the professionals, or many professionals, suffer from a feeling that I don't have purpose in life. I don't know what my life is. They're very dedicated, very devoted, but in the end they're lost. And the ones who have it the worst are the places where there's the most responsibility. So like the guys who run the radars, the traffic controllers, they have it the worst. But they're giving a service that nobody can give. They're very special. They see like in 3D.
They're not dealing with people.
That makes it even worse for them
That's
because
what I'm saying,
because
yeah.
it's like a little blip on the screen.
And
It's 400 people or a little blip on the screen, and they know it. And I'm supposed to keep this thing going, and they've got in heavy air traffic areas, they might be responsible for 100,000 people at any moment, and one mistake, and so it's very, very hard, and there's no meaning to it in the end because. So
I don't understand the jump.
I don't understand
from
why-
being-
Why there's no
it's
meaning?
important
Why
that
isn't-
they
What's
take care of these people
what's
too.
the punchline?
There's no meaning to this. They're
So
saving
why
lives.
isn't human service?
it's not people.
Oh.
That's the thing, that they're not even seeing the people. It's like even it's just a concept.
At least you're dealing
You
with
can
the
at least you
person.
touch them, but still
The
another
dentist has
person,
the
another
highest
person.
suicide rate of all
So I
medical
thought it was air
professionals.
traffic controllers, but that's why I brought
No,
the
medical professionals.
Oh, medical.
Yeah.
But even doctors, they burn out.
Yeah, they burn out. And again, the reason is because nobody tells you. We know and they know that they're saving lives, but it used to be that the king would come and knight them. Like you're part of this. You're not just a guy who's. Why are they doing it really? They're doing it in the end for parnasa.
Mhm.
In the end, they don't know why they're doing it. It's not true. They're really doing it to save lives, but in the end, the parnasa takes over their minds. And that's when they start cutting stuff, and they feel that I really don't care about the people. What I care about is my pocketbook. And that kills you in terms of meaning. So professionalism is one of the worst consequences of the shattering of the ray of light, of the line. So what do? So they burn out. They do less, and they cut corners and so on. So they're in a bad psychological state. So the eitzah that so we think it's just when you're lower down. The truth is the king has the same problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
The king also has the same problem. Even if you're at the very top of the line, and you're supposed to be giving the meaning to everybody, you have the same issue. Because who are you going to hold on to? Who's going to give you meaning? One of the great things about, at least they try to make it this way, I think she really is, about Queen Elizabeth, is that she, very early on, mamish at the very beginning of her reign, she understood that she was giving meaning to things. She's really the Israel of Europe. She's the hierarchy of Europe. Everything is, if there's any semblance of still hierarchy in the world, it all comes from her. It doesn't come from us. Nobody cares about us. But she understood very early on that was a role. But who does she hold on to? Who's giving her meaning?
Divine right.
Good. That's why they invented divine right in the first place. Because it has to be that at the top, the line has to be connected to the divine. Above you, there has to be Hashem. And you have to be receiving it from Hashem. If you're not receiving it from Hashem, there's no way in the world that you can spend 50, or she's been doing it, I don't know, for 70 years or however long. There's no way in the world that you could continue to in Hebrew it's lefones. That's exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu does. It's dat. It's to give people consciousness that they have meaning. So the Rambam says, what's the definition of a king? She'en me'alav ela Hashem elokav. There's nothing above him except for God. But if he doesn't have Hashem above him, he's not going to last. So what was David's last will and testament to Shlomo? Da'at Elokei avicha ve'ovdeo. Know Hashem your God and then serve him. You have to know. If you don't know Hashem, if you're not investing yourself in knowing Hashem, and knowing here is like knowing the circle around you. To having faith is like Torah, whatever you have faith in. If you don't know Hashem through what He's given you, you won't be able to serve Him and serve the people. You won't be able to function this way. So as a parent, as a teacher, whatever kind of hierarchical position you have, in the end you have to feel that it was by divine right. So even so every day that I wake up, so I said, why am I here? By divine right. What is by divine right? Divine right here means that I have control over this body and this life, because that's what Hashem wants.
But that won't tell you specifically what you need to do.
No.
That'll just make
That's
you get
just
up in the morning.
feeling the
So
faith.
you're plugged in. You're plugged in.
The reason you have to plug in is, we haven't talked about this yet, we'll talk about it a lot, is that the line doesn't touch the circle. So we may have said something about it a long time ago, but there's a gap. There's a tiny gap, and that gap can only be surmounted by faith. You have to skip over that gap. It's a big deal. Otherwise, everybody would feel connected right away. But that gap is what allows you, that's by the way another example of tzimtzum, of contraction, that they don't touch. And so it's work on your part to reconnect to where your source is.
Is it almost like it doesn't matter if you have that, if you're plugged in there, it doesn't really matter, it's not so confusing what you're here for. You do what you do because you're plugged in.
First of all, you do, right, exactly. First of all, you
You'll
have
be
that it's all
doing
good.
something
It doesn't
divine.
matter.
Okay.
It's the feeling that gives you the feeling, we'll see, maybe not today, but we'll see it. This gives you the feeling what the Baal Shem Tov called equanimity.
Oh, yeah, we talked
Whether
about that.
whether it's good or it's bad, it's all good.
Mhm.
Whether people say good things about me, they say bad things about me, they ridicule me or they commend me, doesn't matter. It's all the same.
But I'm saying also, can you almost trust the natural flow of whatever work you find
Can-
yourself
can-
doing
can-
because you're.
because it's all good.
Mhm.
But that
Which
only
makes
works.
it more concentrated.
That only works when you're in a very hierarchical society. So if you were born as a laborer, it's okay, it's good to be a laborer. Today, nobody can say that. Why? Because there's no more lines. Basically, where you are is where it ends, and you have to choose something. We're all professionals. So as a professional, now I have to take the next step. I have to create my own line. That's basically what it's
Would you
saying.
say the test is of if you're really following the line is your burnout? Is that your test? If there's
Okay, if-
burnout, it's
okay.
like something's not plugged in.
You're not connected.
And if there's no burnout, then you can trust the path.
You continue to know Hashem. Every person has a different way of knowing Hashem. But yeah, I usually think that for everybody it goes through Torah.
Mhm.
So if you're a dentist, I have this one dentist who sees me. I keep telling him, he's very open to it now. He's beginning to do it. But I told him, you have to write a book about teeth and Torah. If you don't write a book about teeth and Torah, who will? I can't write a book about teeth and Torah. I can write about what it says in Torah. I don't understand teeth though. You do. And I started showing him sources. So he's a very believing Jew. He knew there must be something about it, but he couldn't believe what there was. There's an infinite amount. But in any topic you take.
But what if
My
he
teeth-
just what if
my
he
teeth
didn't
is
do
very
that? What if he was
So
just
he's gonna burn out.
taking care of people?
Maybe give his
He's burning
Torah
out.
while his
Why teeth? It's not important for people to take care of their teeth. Like, okay, he's not saving hearts, but I mean.
No, it's very important. But he's burning out.
But it has to be
Because he's just
connected.
servicing.
But maybe he's doing the right work. He's just not doing it from the right place.
Yeah.
I mean, he has to write a book about teeth.
So the book is
That'll help him.
is a starting point,
It's a
as it were,
tool.
to give you
put him in that.
some thoughts about that Hashem wants this.
Mm-hmm.
Hashem talked about this. There was a reason why there's 32 Elokim in Maseh Bereshit, because there's 32 teeth. It's not the other way around, of course. Maybe that is the other way around. There's 32 teeth because they correspond. There's 32 times it says Elokim in Maseh Bereshit. There are all kinds of.
So define how you don't burn out again.
You have to reconnect to the infinite, to the circle around.
In everything you do.
Okay.
In your profession, you have to
Okay.
connect it.
You have to write the book.
So
And use it as a doorstop to connect the little gap. So there's always some connection back to the.
Sorry, so in order with the structure that we have of the line going down, in order to reconnect, so it's a silver shot, there has to be along the line, along the cut, to reconnect to the circle. Because
Okay.
otherwise, unless it connects, at what point does it reconnect? Through Kavanah, through
Mhm.
whatever.
Those are dot.
It has to
Dot
be
is
the
what
right-
connects.
But it has to be the right silver shot, otherwise
Okay.
24/7 maybe.
Okay.
Break.
Maybe it's not every day, but there's a lot of the time. The doctors that I've met that have the most interest in what they do are the ones who do research.
Yeah.
Sure, because they still open.
So it's a smaller type of godliness, but it's still godliness.
And you feel it, you feel it. So I think in any profession, you're going to keep going.
If you don't keep studying in your profession, that's why they say you have to keep studying. You have to keep doing something.
The circle has a tiny opening.
There's a gap between the line and the circle.
No, I'm saying there's a circle. The line comes down. Is there an opening for the
No.
line, or it just pierces through the circle?
It doesn't pierce through.
What?
It's inside the circle.
The
It's
line is
only inside. It doesn't go
Ah,
out.
there's a closed circle.
The one time that we try to pierce out is with the lulav.
Okay.
When you hit the lulav up into the sukkah,
He's trying
Because
to
it's stuck,
reach.
you're trying to reach beyond the circle.
Oh, it's good. It's good.
That's what we tell people. No, that's what we.
Hit the top of the circle.
That's what we tell people, so they don't feel bad that they ruined the lulav.
Okay. So the circle's closed and there's
But
a
it's
line
true.
inside.
But it's still true. It's still true.
The circle's closed.
It's called
there's a
Dad
line.
Ein Sof.
The circle's closed. There's a line
Okay.
inside, and then
A
there's a
line-
line outside.
No, there's no line outside.
Oh, outside is just the source. Oh, okay, sure. Go ahead. That's what it is.
Where's the gap?
The gap is between the circle and between the line.
Closed.
Inside the circle.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay.
And I made a gap there, no?
But you didn't actually.
Yes,
So
there
this
is.
the
It's
gap.
not connected.
I think I even wrote it, no?
It's not
Maybe
connected,
it's
especially
the gap.
down.
The upside down.
No, there's
Okay.
another gap there if you want.
Okay, I got it. I see. Perfect.
I see it.
Okay.
You can't really
So
go.
it's only a small leap of faith.
Right? It's
Okay.
a
It's a huge leap.
No, I'm
of faith.
laughing because it's a tiny space.
Again, it looks like it's very tiny. Oh, so here maybe I didn't make the gap. Let me see. No, I made a gap, of course. Yeah, on purpose. I remember that I made this.
No.
Anyway.
So the line doesn't go outside the circle, or it does? I mean,
No, it can't get outside.
And
the
it's
circle.
up coming down. And
That's why in our regular consciousness we can't see beyond the infinite. Well, we once talked about a mashal for this. That today in astrophysics they have this problem that you can't see beyond the cosmic background radiation. It's like that there's 3 degree Kelvin everywhere you look, and you can't see beyond it.
That's the leap of faith.
Whatever radio telescope you use, you can't see beyond this. It's like a barrier. It's like a wall all around the universe that nobody can see what's beyond.
so the faith that you're connecting to
Is
is,
it straighter than?
That's true.
Faith is the circle.
so the jump is from the line to the
Right.
circle.
On the Oma Kivim is the Orpini, in another way. Like that is the Orpini, isn't it?
Right.
That line is the
Right,
Orpini
right,
that we
right,
bring
right,
up. But it's like the womb and the umbilical cord. I think of that in a sense. Like
The line is the human. When we say that there's Tzelem Elokim, that there's an image of God, it's really the line. The circle isn't the image of God. Okay? The line, like a human being, is long. Nature is round. Nature doesn't have an image of God in it. Only a human being does. So the human being is like the line. There's a famous picture, I think, from Da Vinci. That you see this from the Renaissance. That you see a person inside a square, inside a circle. So that was, I don't know if it was contemporary exactly with the Arizal when he did his. I'm sure the Arizal never saw it, but it was going around in the world. This type of thinking that the man is like a straight line inside a circle. But I have both.
But it's feeding the bitachon, which is the line. You have to feed
To be human is to have bitachon. That's what it means.
the bitachon, but it's fed by the imunah, no?
Right.
Of the
That's.
circle.
Sorry.
Isn't that being fed by the circle? Aren't we-
It's being fed, but not exactly, because there's a little bit of a gap. You have to work on being fed from there.
Yeah.
Really inside of you, it's like 2 separate forces. That's what we're saying. That faith and confidence here are like 2 separate forces that work together. So the faith is the circle, and the confidence is the line. But you have to connect them a little bit, at least. So you have to have both, in other words. The connection happens inside you. It's not like you can go to the top of the mountain. It's not like you get to the top of Everest and you jump a little and then you hit the circle. It's inside of you.
No.
Yeah, no, I know you know. I'm just saying it. I'm just making it like.
No, but I've understood it that the cloud is comes. It's what's brought down from the
circle.
From the circle. So that's really where we access
The infinite.
Emunah to bring it down.
Good.
We have to bring it further down.
Uh-huh.
Even though
There's a
they
gap.
can't exist one without the other.
Right.
can't
No, they
coexist
can,
without.
because a lot of people don't have faith. So they have to have some kind of faith, otherwise they take themselves out of the world a long time ago. So they have some faith. Faith is always about the future. Because in the present, faith can't be grasped. It's too much. Again, it's like the infinite part of Hashem. It's ungraspable. But you have to have some kind of yadativ. You have to have some kind of connection to it. So, anyway,
So when you do the surrender and we're putting the light to the side, well, the circle then is just a circle. There's no color.
then you feel the circle.
And then it would just
It's
look
like
a
you have
plain
to
circle.
you have to subtract yourself from your reality.
What is outside the circle? God's unknowable infinity.
So that's the simple explanation. Obviously, outside the circle, there is more and more levels
Mm-hmm.
of deeper faculties that we're not aware of yet.
So people higher on the hierarchy have to inspire the people down below.
That's how it worked. That's how it used to work. It's still that way,
Until you
except
reach the
except
level
now
of
it's like
confidence.
movie stars or millionaires or things like that. It still works that way because the world can't function any other
Yeah,
way.
but that's the people down below looking at it.
Right.
So is that
Are the
That's
people on
on
top,
the top also.
are they responsible enough to know that they need to inspire? Some of them are. You know, the United
So
Nations
that's-
picks all these ambassadors of goodwill. Who do they take? They're not going to take me. I'm not an ambassador of goodwill because nobody knows me. It has to be somebody who's famous. So theoretically, the rich and the famous was supposed to be philanthropists. They're supposed to be moral. They're supposed to be this. And that's, by the way, why everybody talks about them. Because what they're waiting for, People magazine, is waiting to see somebody who's moral. Obviously, they make their money from showing that they're immoral. But really, they're using the people's need to find somebody who's larger than life. And what they do is they cut them down and show that they're not larger than life.
so when we're talking about the king only having Hashem over him, but the king is supposed to be inspiring the people
Mhm.
but down below him.
That's the real role of a king. The role of a king is not to rule, in the sense of telling people what to do. If he has to tell people what to do, he failed. He absolutely failed. He's a failure. You throw him out. You have to find somebody who, it says like Shaul was Mishichmo Lemala Mikol Yisrael. It says that he was taller. It doesn't mean maybe he was also taller. But the point was that he was an inspiration for everybody. Everybody looked at him and said, "Oh, this is the type of person I want to be." So that's you'll see that when I think that when the Queen of England passes away, like most people eventually do, something's going to shift in the world. I don't know exactly
True.
what,
Yeah, for sure.
but something will change.
That's what I
How
was
old is
thinking
she?
with that. Her family
96?
doesn't have that sense of.
What?
Nobody.
I don't think her
knows.
family has that sense of divine
Oh
right.
no. Oh, if the younger ones do, I don't know. We'll see.
William.
It seems that the younger one does.
Really?
That the one who married the Jew seems to have.
Yeah, but he's so far down the
The older
line.
one married a Jew.
Right.
Yes.
That guy seems like he has.
Harry.
He has it.
Yes.
They would do well to bury
Yeah,
Charles
yeah,
with
yeah.
her and just skip.
No, but the other guy is
Oh, yeah, I
before
think
Harry.
William.
Charles.
William. No, before in
No,
between
Harry is a
William.
dumb.
Oh, you're not
I'm
talking
talking about
Harry.
William.
You're talking about William.
William does have some sort
William,
of,
she's
like,
He has
Jewish?
some.
What do you mean she's
Some
Jewish?
sort
His
of
wife
like-
is Jewish.
No, she isn't.
some sort of submissiveness to like a higher
She is, as far as I know, she's
Jewish.
really
I
Jewish.
do not know.
Her
Nobody
mother's
knows.
Jewish.
Yeah.
What?
That's what I heard too.
No, that's actually.
Works for our
What?
theory.
It's not true? I think it's true.
We'll take
I didn't
it.
spend more than 3 seconds on it, but I think that it's true. It seemed like it was said in
Where was that? A reliable source?
People magazine,
Yeah, right.
which I read every.
When David wanted to build the Beis Hamikdash, he was drawing down this cow.
Right.
And why was God stopping him? He was doing something noble and with great trust.
Because he was ignoring the people. That's what it says. He fought a lot of wars because he was ignoring the people. The wars were his way of taking care of the economy. And
He was not being instructed by Hashem at all to do those
No.
wars.
they were a solution to the problem that he had. The problem that he had was that he was hoarding a treasury
Instead
to
of
build the
trusting in
to
Hashem.
build the temple instead of trusting in Hashem. It's like the opposite of Reb Usha. Not that I can't, but that's what Chazal say.
See, there's an element
just
of,
repeating
of
what they
force.
say.
There's an element of like pushing.
They say they describe the whole situation there. There was not the economy was in shams, and they came to him and they said, let us use the money that's in your treasury. He says, no, this is for the temple.
Wow.
So he said, what should we do then? We don't have enough food. The economy can't work when you keep taking taxes and the money goes out of circulation. Everything, he just kept hoarding it. So we said to them, okay, so if that doesn't work, go to my minister of war, go to Yoav, and go fight wars. Wars are always good for the economy, right? Not because you make more products, but also that, but because you're going to conquer people and takes the spoils back. And Hashem hated those wars. Hashem said that wasn't the way you should have done it. What did Shlomo do? The first thing Shlomo did, he opened the treasuries and he spilled so how did he build the temple then? No problem. The moment that everybody's with you, they'll give happily. And in a certain sense, that's how Moshe Rabbeinu built the tabernacle. How did he build the tabernacle? From the spoils of the Red Sea. You can't not give and expect that people would be interested. It doesn't work that way. And Hashem said, so it's very nice that you really want to build me a house, David. But the house is not for you. I want my people to come there. So because of that, apparently, that's what Chazal say. That's why he hated his wars. It wasn't the bloodshed in its own, because sometimes you have to fight.
He was kind of
But he
manipulating
was doing
reality.
it. He was shedding blood because some unnecessary reason, and that Hashem can't stand. That's not. Anyway.
Did you say that if he would have taken himself, without faith, he would have taken himself out of the world a long time ago? Are you implying that a person takes himself out of the world
Yeah, that's what I meant.
instead of Hashem?
That's called suicide. Most people have faith because they don't commit suicide.
Oh,
They have faith in the future. At some level, they have faith in the future.
That's an extreme loss of faith.
Right. So they at least have this basic feeling. That's what you were saying. That at some level, everybody has some faith that the future is good, and that's what keeps us here. As we said, that the circle is a guard. It keeps you inside the world. This world is mamish crazy. It's a crazy place. Why would you do it? Because there's a lot to be gained in the end. But while you're going through the process, you might lose faith that you came here for a reason. By the way, this world is very much from the point of view of the soul. It's like a stepping stone. It's a means to an end. But when you come here, you forget that it's a means to an end. That's from the soul's point of view. From the body's point of view, it's not a means to an end.
Right.
It's the end itself. So there's also conflicting pictures here. So the soul is more circular. And the body in this sense is actually, or the psyche as it is in the body is more straight. It has some purpose here. The purpose is here, not somewhere else. So these are very, they go on talking about this for hours. But sometimes, the reason I said this, sometimes people belittle life by telling you that it's really just a means to a higher end. And then it sort of makes fun of the whole world. Like, so you mean all the suffering, everything is just a means? It doesn't mean something in and of itself. That when you build a house in the world, so I know the houses don't last more than 100 years, 200 years. But should that be the way you treat it? Should you build houses as a temporary dwelling? There is such a concept. There are people very high spiritual level who describe it this way. But no, the minute the Rebbe began talking about that exile with an aleph becomes the redemption, Gola with an aleph becomes Geula, what he was saying is this world that we're building right here, Chavi's apartment, is part of the redemption. It's not like somehow we're going to be somewhere else. When the redemption comes, Chavi's going to be in this apartment.
Really?
Really?
And this
What about all
apartment,
the people who lived here before me?
They're still being,
They'll
where
come
are
also.
they going?
They'll come.
They'll live
If they're
with
not
you.
living
Well,
somewhere
well,
else,
well,
if they're not living somewhere else, they'll come here. Everybody will come here.
Hopefully they like your dog.
Everyone's gonna love everything.
That's true too.
So there's infinite value in what you're doing here. It's not just.
What are you looking for?
It's true that it's not yet revealed. We can't see it yet. But what we're doing, even though it seems like it's fleeting, like it's passing, and life is passing, and the body passes, and so on, when the redemption does come, suddenly the infinity in the physical will be revealed. And so, when a person lives in four walls, these walls are part of who he is. Forever. It's not just a, it's
Wait
not
a
just
minute,
a,
most people live in a bunch of places during their lifetime.
the same thing as most souls lived in a bunch of
Different
bodies.
Different bodies, right?
And each one of them is part of what that soul is.
Right.
A soul is not in the same way that a person is a beautiful mashal you just gave. That I'm the sum total of all the places I inhabited in life, all the different jobs I did, all the different places, all the different relationships I had. I'm the sum total of that. It doesn't go away. So the person is much more infinite than just where he is at the moment. The same way, the soul, said it right now, it's in this body, but it was in other bodies as well. Said it's not. It's no contradiction. It can inhabit many bodies. Because the soul is not something physical. It doesn't have to be either here or here.
But if a soldier is killed like Devere,
Sorry.
if a soldier is taken
Okay.
out of the world like Devere, it's the end of his tikkun here?
No. Maybe he'll come back again. Doesn't have to necessarily be there.
But we're the last souls.
Yeah, right.
What time is it?
I ain't coming back.
7 minutes.
A few more minutes.
It's my last round.
Distract.
That's what my husband said. I don't want to come back.
What
Yeah,
do you
but he
mean?
doesn't
I
have
thought
a
we were meant to
choice.
finish it.
You don't.
So like the markings on a ruler that separate between the parts of what is being measured. So here we have this concept. Sorry, I skipped a little bit. What we want to say is that everything that is human, the human form, that's part of the ray, part of the measuring rod, part of this light that fills all worlds. All of reality, from Adam Kadmon and on, is in the image of man. Really the image of Hashem, but it comes down as what we call primordial man, Adam Kadmon. And he emits the lights of the ear, the nose, the mouth, everything. And all these lights, really what they are different revelations of humanity. They're different revelations of, again, what in the past you could say this part of the hierarchy. The ray of light, on line 219, the ray of light is the measuring aspect of the Mamale. There's two aspects to it now. The big secret here is
What's my
That-
life?
the filling, the light that fills the void. It really fills everything. Everything that has any life in it is like filled with this light, with this revelation of Hashem. Again, light is just another name for revelation. So the ray of light is a measuring aspect of the Mamal. It's the external aspect actually. And whenever you talk about hierarchy, you're talking about the external aspect of it's what gives structure. So like in our body, the structure comes from what? What gives our body? From the bones. So we tend to think about structure as something internal. Yeah. But really, the symbol of structure in Torah is the kamta, it's called, which is really a grasshopper. It's a grasshopper. What's special about a grasshopper? It has an exoskeleton. The skeleton is on the outside. What gives the structure is actually on the outside. And then we say that when it's on the outside, we have this phrase in Kabbalah, it's called the levushay mineh uvei, whose clothing is part of itself. The clothing is like what gives the structure. So really for us, the structure is what I wear. Since I wear this, you know that I'm not a lifeguard on the beach, right? Right? Most people figured that out when I walked in. So what is that? That my structure, my skeleton, where I fit on the hierarchy, it comes from my clothing. That's, by the way, why people don't want to wear uniform type clothing anymore. It used to be, like if you were in Europe in the 20s, even 30s, So the uniform was the most important thing you could have. So everybody wore a uniform. If you were the guy who made the elevator, you opened the door and you closed it, you wore a uniform. Because it meant that you were somewhere on the hierarchy. And if you didn't have a uniform,
Right.
so you're one of these professionals again, which means professional what? Professional without any meaning. He's outside the system. Now it's the other way around. Nobody wears a uniform. Well, a few people who do. And if you wear a in the hospital you have to have some kind of so that people don't think that you're the janitor. But really, it's no longer the way it used to be. It used to be that even in the hospital there were ranks. You saw who was the head nurse because she had something more around her. She had like some kind of something tied on her arm. Whatever. You had to have ranks. That's how it worked. So this measuring part of the ray is the outside of it. It's the external aspect. The ray is like a measuring rod which makes it possible to distinguish and separate different parts of the created world from one another, like the markings on a ruler that separate between the parts of what is being measured. But on the inside of this ray there's a thread. So in Kabbalah it's called kav v'chut. So in Kabbalah it almost doesn't appear, but in Chassidus it's made into a big deal. That just as there's an exoskeleton, there's also a thread running through it. What's this thread? The thread, on the other hand, acts to thread together the parts that have been measured by the ray or the measuring rod. The thread is meant to, like a thread, to stitch everything together, because what did the measuring rod do? It separated.
Right.
So now you have to... So what?
Sounds like in the Mishkan, like that.
Right. Exactly, right. The Beriach HaTichon, Beriach min HaKatzeh HaKatzeh. So that's the Tiferet. A lot of times it's called the Tiferet of the Kav. Because like the Beriach, that's what it did. It put everything together again. And together they are called the powers of separation and the power of inter-inclusion in reality. So even in reality, as much as there's something that's the thing that people miss. That really what's happened is not so much that the hierarchy has been torn apart, because hierarchy always tore apart. That's the thing that's missed. Hierarchy by definition separates. What people are really looking for is the thread inside. They're looking for why are we all connected in the end. Because really the world can't function without hierarchy. It doesn't work. It's not that the world fell apart. It's just that the inner soul of this hierarchy is being looked for. They're looking for what's the thread that ties it all together. So you call it our humanity, you call it this, it doesn't matter. But in the end, you're looking for something and the amazing thing is, what is it called? It's called, in English, we translate it as inter-inclusion, itkalelut. In Hebrew, it's the same word, which in English translates as inclusiveness. What's the whole, 21st century about? It's about being inclusive. That it doesn't matter if you're like this, it doesn't matter what type you are, you're a man, a woman, not a man, not a woman. Everything's tied together.
And in England they have bathrooms where, you ever see that? There's a picture of a man, a picture of a woman, and then a picture of something that's one leg is the pants and one half is the
Or it's
skirt.
like the everyone.
It's like both
How
together.
is it the everyone?
Both together. I was like, what's that?
So,
Unisex.
But maybe because that's the expression, it comes out in very odd ways, because everyone's looking to have this like
good.
inclusiveness.
Nachon.
What
The
connects.
inclusiveness is looking for the thread, for the chut.
And it's our generation in a way at extreme and rectified, breaking down the hierarchy, because that's the religion now.
Nachon. That's the religion.
So
How much is chut equal to?
23?
23. So it's equal to chaya and chedva. It's the chaya level of the psyche. That's what they're looking for. So we'll end here. So this became a little bit also about culture, but it's the same. But there's no psychology without sociology.
Good.